What a beautiful morning. Thank you for this opportunity to be here as brothers and sisters in Christ. And we just thank you that you give us this opportunity to put the message of the good news of Jesus Christ in this place, Washington Park, the public forum, where we can express the good news of Christ and our love for Him. We ask that these paintings just glorify you.
Every Christmas season, there are stories in the media about court battles involving religious displays being placed on public property. Two parts of the First Amendment came head-to-head in 1988 in the city of Ottawa, Illinois. It involved 16 paintings depicting the life of Jesus Christ, which were displayed in a public park. This is the story of those paintings and the attempt to ban their display in a public park. The story demonstrates God's providence in preserving the right of free religious expression.
Today, on this special program, I would like to take you back to a small rural town in central Illinois, to a town that is symbolic of American towns and cities across this nation, a town that has experienced a battle over cherished traditions and values, and a town whose story is both a warning and a hope for all of us.
Since 1956, paintings of Christ, 16 of them in all, have been erected during the Christmas season. This was originally started by the Chamber of Commerce Retail Association. This was done nearly every year until approximately 1988, when an individual filed a lawsuit in federal district court in Chicago asking that the paintings be taken down because they violated the Establishment Clause of the Constitution because they were located on public property.
Grandpa, why are these paintings here?
These pictures are here because God wanted them to be here. These pictures show the life of His Son, Jesus, when He came to earth from heaven to live a perfect life according to God's law and pay the penalty for the sins of the entire world. The Chamber of Commerce commissioned 16 paintings showing the life of Jesus from His birth until after His rising from the dead. At that time, Ottawa had a thriving business district where people came from all over to shop at Christmas time. A man by the name of Jim Fitzgerald was worried that people coming to do their Christmas shopping in Ottawa would forget the celebration of Jesus' birth, the true meaning of Christmas.
The Ottawa JCs started in 1947 after World War II, and young people were looking for things to do. And so they were the manpower for the Ottawa Chamber of Commerce.
Our parents were really part of the generation, the World War II generation, who were really into volunteering and making their community better. My dad, Xenophon Mitchell, known as Mitch or Zenny, came up with an idea. Why don't we have paintings of the life of Jesus that could be painted as a gift for the city and the citizens of Ottawa and could be placed in the park at Christmas time?
Back in 1955, Harold Reiner, associated with the Art Institute in Chicago, they commissioned him to create these paintings. And it took him about 8 weeks. I came by train every weekend and spent long days in the basement of the Roxy Theater.
And my dad was the manager of the Roxy Theater. The Roxy Theater basement was chosen as a place that the painter could come, have his own access, paint at his leisure if he needed to. I was able to go down a few times to see the painter. And then when the paintings went up, it became an Ottawa tradition.
Jim Fitzgerald is known to say he wanted to put Christ back into Christmas. And that was the whole idea of having something very impressive, 16 large paintings, 4 foot by 7 foot, all lined up along LaSalle Street in Washington Park.
Oh, come, let us adore thee. I'm Jim Keeley, and I'm pleased to be with two friends here with regard to the Ottawa Freedom Association, which has 16 paintings of the life of Christ that we've been putting up over the last few years. And we're just going to tell you a little bit about that this morning. So.
I'm George Hupp, also known as Skip Hupp, and I'm the attorney for the Ottawa Freedom Association.
And I'm Kirk Hawthorne, member of the Ottawa Freedom Association. Also not here is Lloyd Chapman, who's also the third member of the Ottawa Freedom Association.
The location, of course, was in a public park. But one reason that location was chosen, it was at the north end of the business district. And Ottawa at that time had a very thriving shopping district. This is the days before malls. And people would drive from miles around to come to Ottawa to shop. And as they were coming into Ottawa down LaSalle Street, they would see the paintings in the park and remind them that Jesus is the reason for Christmas.
I can recall when I was approximately 11 or 12 years old, my father was a member of the JCs. Many of the children, as myself, of regular JCs at that time, would help their fathers and put up the pictures every year. I was probably about 11 or 12 years old and helped with it for probably 3 or 4 years there. In the 50s, they were still stored underneath the Roxy Theater in the basement. I see the true value of why we have these pictures in the park, so that we can understand the life of Christ at this time of the year.
The first couple of years, it was very popular, and then there's always a few naysayers or atheists wanted the paintings taken down. I don't think the paintings were actually up more than 5 or 6 years in the early days, and then eventually they got stored away. Every once in a while to be brought back.
The paintings disappeared for a while, and I remember my dad being so upset because no one knew for a while where they were stored.
My name is Kirk Hawthorne, and my earliest remembrance of the paintings in the park were from the early 1980s, from when they were rediscovered. My brother Kent Hawthorne had been heavily involved with the Ottawa JCs. He was at our house. I was standing right next to him, and he got a phone call, and they said to him, "Hey, we have these paintings that we've uncovered here at a shed, a maintenance shed underneath the bleachers at Reardon Pool. And first of all, do the Ottawa JCs want them? And secondly, can they get them out of there? And then where would they store them?" So my brother Kent happened to work at the radio station, which is very close to Washington Park. So my brother sought permission and got permission to store them at the radio station, which worked out really well. And that's how they were rediscovered. What was lost was now found.
It was 1980 when it was first brought to our attention when I was involved with the JCs. And they got a hold of Kent Hawthorne. And so we brought it up to our meeting. We found out about these paintings. We found out, we didn't know anything about it, that they were, according to the newspaper article, that they were first started by the JCs in 1956. So we were all excited about getting them all cleaned up and put back up at Washington Park.
And so we're like, well, we didn't know anything about them. And so we went and looked at them like, oh my gosh. They were stored up on Norris Drive underneath that pool, whatever it was. Yeah. And so that was just November 20th of 1980. Okay. And so then we went and got them and kind of regrouped as a JCs and we went and put them up because I guess they realized that JC's at one point was involved in it. So, but I worked at the radio station, and somewhere along the way, I don't remember the details, but I'm like, hey, can we store them here? So that's how they're at the radio station, because I worked at the radio station back in the 80s. And
Fantastic.
so that's my part of the story.
Well, thanks for being here this morning.
Thanks.
Sharing that with us.
We heard a lot of great feedback from the community after that year, and we were anxious to bring him up again, and we did it every year until the lawsuit.
Right.
Well, when they started putting the paintings back up in 1980, there weren't any problems until about 1986, when a man who was working at the nuclear station south of Ottawa wrote a letter to the city and said he was an atheist, and said that the paintings being located in a city park offended him. The city basically treated his letter with some contempt. Unfortunately, the mayor sent it to the newspaper and made a big deal out of it. 2 years later, in 1988, he actually filed a suit against the city of Ottawa, demanding that the city of Ottawa tell the Jaycees you can no longer put the paintings in the park, because it's a violative of the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, which says Congress shall make no law regarding the establishment of a religion. He was saying because the paintings are there, the city is appearing to endorse Christianity, which is, he claimed, and he had some legal support behind him in the cases that said that it's a violation of the Establishment Clause. They decided to pass a resolution following that at the city council meeting, actually endorsing the paintings. And the ACLU pointed to that many times during the case, that here the city of Ottawa actually endorsed it.
The general consensus in the Ottawa community, based on the phone calls we had that day and in following days, was who are these people that want to come in and tell us what we can and cannot do in our downtown community park?
The city basically was looking at a situation where if they lost the suit, they would have to pay his attorney's fees. Well, that's the approach they used here. They said, if you take the paintings down, if you denied the Jaycees the right to use it, we won't make you pay our attorney's fees. The Jaycees got in touch with me at that point. Actually, they got in touch with my partner, Paul Martin, who had been a very active Jaycee in his career. He was one of the senators for the Jaycees, and Paul came in and said, what do you think? Should we get involved? And I said, I think we should.
I got a call from the Jaycees, and I don't remember the exact sequence, but to the effect that the city council was rumored to going to be voting to not allow the paintings in the park because they didn't want to get involved in litigation. And I said something to you about it, and we literally walked over to the council meeting that afternoon or evening. Without much forethought of how we were going to go about it. And as I recall, as we were walking over there, you said, well, you're the Jaycee, are you going to do the talking? And I said, no, this is your area, you do the talking. And you did what I still remember as a brilliant presentation to the council. I mean that genuinely, because it was very good, very good.
The response of the city council was one of fear. The city attorney advised the councilman that if Mr. Rohr were to win his lawsuit, that the city could be called upon to pay his attorney's fees.
Now, the free speech, of course, is also part of the First Amendment to the Constitution, which says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. And paintings have been interpreted to be an expression and therefore are protected by the First Amendment. So we have two clauses of the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States technically butting against each other. We had Mr. Rohr saying that violates the Establishment Clause, and we came in and said that we have the right of free speech. What was critical here is that the Ottawa Jaycees was a private organization. It was not a government organization. The Establishment Clause only applies to government. I went to the city council and I told them that, and they had already made up their mind they were not going to fight because they did not want to have to pay attorney's fees, so they passed a resolution saying you cannot have the paintings in the park anymore. You know, the Bible says God can make the wise foolish. They did a very foolish thing, Mr. Rohr did. His attorney got greedy and said, okay, now pay my attorney's fees, $5,000. So I get a phone call from the city attorney and saying, you still want to fight for these paintings? Because this guy's gotten greedy, he's made all the city councilmen mad. I said, you bet. We got in touch with the National Legal Foundation, which was headed by Bob Skolrud. I mean, Bob Skolrud flew in. I remember meeting him up at the Old Ramada Inn and having breakfast with them.
I first heard about this case when we got a phone call from an attorney in Ottawa, Illinois. When I saw the park, when I saw the pictures that were being displayed and the times that they were being displayed during the Christmas season, I was concerned that this was a definite threat to free speech and specifically to religious speech.
And we went down to the city council that morning. It was a special meeting to where he addressed the city council and said, I'm here to help and let's fight. He hired an attorney in Chicago, an Orthodox Jew named Joel Chefetz, a very fine, brilliant individual.
We as Christians and we as even citizens have got to stop the censoring of religious expression in America. And the ACLU is out to do it, and they're doing it by intimidation. I don't want that to happen. The National Legal Foundation doesn't want that to happen. And we can provide the wherewithal to stop that in America.
This individual attorney that filed the case originally got the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, involved right away. Okay, so he bowed out of the case. And the ACLU filed a motion with the court called a motion for summary judgment. They just said it's violative of the Establishment Clause, ordered them out of the park. And Judge Shader agreed with them. And so he ordered the paintings down after they'd been put up.
So, where does the ACLU get its establishment of religion argument? They point to a 1986 resolution passed by the Ottawa City Council, which said in part that the city endorses the activities of the Ottawa Jaycees in maintaining said pictures and incorporating them in the overall Christmas display that annually graces the downtown area of the city. Witcher claims that when the city said this, the message of the paintings ceased to be the free speech of the Jaycees alone and became the official speech of the city of Ottawa.
That's the city's error. Because it did that, the message of the paintings, that Jesus Christ is divine and that we should all worship him, really became the message of the city of Ottawa.
But the city says it welcomes all religious expressions in the park, along with the other decorations that make up the city's annual Christmas display. Those other decorations include the snowman, the lights, and the decorated lampposts, all of which the court has said can stay in the park. The only display that had to go was the one with Jesus Christ pictured in it.
The paintings were originally a gift to Ottawa's townspeople in 1956. Until 1990, when one person, backed by the ACLU, sued to force the city of Ottawa to take down the paintings. Why?
The fact that a religious message would have a home on public property is as offensive to the Establishment Clause as if the mayor had let the Jaycees build a church in the park.
Mr. Chefetz, do you see this as a church-state issue?
Well, it's a church-state issue to some extent, obviously. Whenever you're dealing with government, and in this case, the public park is government-owned, and religious viewpoints, there's the potential for a government endorsement of a religious view. But this, I think, really is much more of a free speech case, because the courts have said, and I think most of us realize, that when someone goes into a public place and expresses a point of view, the government isn't endorsing that point of view. The government is simply allowing that individual to exercise his right to free speech.
He ordered the paintings down after they'd been put up. We'd put them up in late November, early December. And on December 9th of 1989, paintings were taken down.
This last painting was left till last. because it symbolizes what this community has to do to keep these paintings in this park. It shows Jesus Christ praying. The people of this town have to pray to keep these paintings in this park.
There must be a lot of emotion over this case. How are residents reacting?
Well, I hear this secondhand, but what I hear is that the community there was shocked.
Most Ottawa residents were stunned by the lawsuit, nearly 500 of whom gathered together to protest the removal of the paintings from the park.
It's a public park. It belongs to us. It doesn't belong to the ACLU or one person.
I haven't met anybody in the community yet that thinks that the pictures should be taken down.
I think they should be there and they should stay there. We enjoy them. If they don't enjoy them, they don't have to look at them.
They never expected the federal judge to rule the way he did, and they're accustomed to seeing these paintings. They have associated it with Christmas time. They're eagerly awaiting the Court of Appeals judgment in this case, and hope it will change.
The calls that came in on the talk show expressing the sentiment in the community was essentially that how can somebody object to something like this? The paintings are put up by a private group in a public park. It's been a tradition in the community for a long time, and why all of a sudden would somebody object to these paintings covering the life of Jesus be up at Christmas time?
I think they were very nice, that the way they were, and it's a very religious community, the city of Ottawa, and there's no reason why they can't be left up the way they were before.
I believe we should have the paintings up. I don't think one person's views should reflect the whole community's.
Our job in the newsroom at WCMY was to cover both sides of the issue, and of course it's a meaningful issue to journalists because the public park is a public forum. They should have that right. All views should be heard in that park. Our job in the news department was not so much like the talk show to reflect the community, but to give both sides of the whole issue.
I was aware that there were some leaders in the community, people that were involved with businesses in the community, who felt that the controversy was affecting the way people looked at Ottawa, Illinois. And they were concerned, I think, from a business standpoint, that it would affect their business. And so they, either directly to me or through someone else, would suggest that we should just let the controversy stop, just take the paintings down, put them somewhere else, and let this whole thing go away without standing up for the right of free expression of religion in a public forum.
If the appeal is going to be lost, I'm curious as to where the paintings would then be placed.
Well, I never, as a lawyer, I never plan on losing a case. So I don't expect that to happen. But I suspect any citizen who goes into a public park and uses it as a forum, as a soapbox, to present his point of view could always do that in his living room or dining room. It's our view that the First Amendment protects his right to do it where he'll be heard, like in Daly Center Plaza in a case decided here in Chicago, where the court held that private groups are entitled to put up a menorah and a creche in Daly Plaza. They're not required to put it in their own private front lawn. That's what the First Amendment is all about.
And so we decided to appeal the case. We knew Judge Shader was wrong, and so we filed briefs with the court, argued the case. They came down with a ruling 2-1 against us, saying Judge Shader's right.
But the panel was split, and interestingly, there was a judge who sat by designation from one of the district courts. So it only had 2 regular judges from the Seventh Circuit, and those 2 judges wound up with diametrically opposed opinions of what transpired. So we took that as an opportunity to rely on the dissenting judge's opinion to file a rehearing motion with the Seventh Circuit. And that is quite an uphill battle in reality. It's not typical that such hearings are granted. And the district court was extremely hostile to the position of the JCs. and the city, and found that it made no difference to the analysis that Washington Park was a public forum. And the district court entered a very broad injunction that prohibited anyone from displaying the paintings in the park.
Now, in most cases, that's the end of it. Your option is to either ask the Supreme Court to take the case, which they don't have to. Now, I'm talking about the Supreme Court of the United States. Or you can ask for an en banc hearing, E-N, separate word, B-A-N-C. And what you're doing is you're saying we want all justices to rehear the case. The JCs said, no more, we're not fighting anymore. And I went and talked till I was blue in the face. There were several people that just were adamant, and they just voted it down, and they just said, we fought the good fight, we're done. I had a problem. I believed in the case, but I didn't have a client. And when your client says no, you got to do what your client says.
So one day I was on the street walking along, and I ran into my good friend and attorney, Skip Hupp. And at that time, Skip told me that he was involved with the paintings and the case that had just been decided by the 3-judge panel of the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals in Chicago. I was very concerned because it looked like the people who had originally been involved in the lawsuit, which was the Ottawa JCs, were at the end of their line and didn't want to go any further, which meant that there would be no appeal from that decision unless Attorney Hupp had a client to represent to carry the case forward. Skip Hupp gave me a copy of the decision to read. So I read the decision of the 3 judges and read the majority opinion by the 2, and then I read the dissent, which was a 60-page dissent by the 3rd dissenting judge. And it sounded to me like the dissent was correct, that indeed the paintings should be shown in the park, that there was a right of free speech that allowed us to go into the park as private citizens and to exercise our right to free speech, even though that speech might include expressions of religion. The problem wasn't that in the First Amendment, the right to free speech is protected, but so is the right to exercise your religion. And so I read the dissent, and it seemed to me that judge expressed it very well in stating that this was a free speech issue, that speech could not be curtailed or prohibited just because it was religious speech, that religious speech was also protected in a public forum just as any other speech was. And so I got back in touch with Skip Hupp and discussed that dissent with him and said, I think this dissenting judge is on the right path, and I think we should go forward. We needed to get over 5 hurdles.
I was greatly encouraged by Jim's offer to come along and help in the cause. And so Jim and I identified, as he mentioned, 5 hurdles. And the first hurdle was to obtain a client to carry on the fight. Jim and I sat down at the Ottawa House restaurant.
That's right.
And had a cup of coffee. And we just thought, well, let's form an organization. Let's form a not-for-profit.
When it became apparent that the Ottawa JCs would no longer pursue the case, the question was, what's going to happen to the case? Is it just going to end right here? And what's going to happen to the paintings? This is a big question in the community. And late in the week, I received a phone call from Skip Hupp, and he was kind of brainstorming about where we were right now. He didn't have a client. The JCs were his client, but soon they were going to stop doing what they were going to do. So he was looking for a client. They decided to have a kind of an organizational meeting to see who might be interested in being involved. Bob Ingalls, I think, got us a room at the local bank, and I think it was a Saturday morning. And a lot of people met down there. It was like a conference room. There was maybe between 25 and 35 people there. At the end of his kind of speech, we went around the room and just, said who would be willing to be involved. And that was the beginning of the Ottawa Freedom Association.
3 men in the community, Lloyd Chapman, Kirk Hawthorne, and Jim Keeley, stepped forward and became the first 3 members of the Ottawa Freedom Association Incorporated. So the first hurdle was met. Now, the big hurdle at that point, forming an organization was easy. big hurdle was that organization didn't own the paintings.
Secondly, we had to get permission from the Jaycees to turn the custody of the paintings over to the Ottawa Freedom Association. And that was done at a meeting of the Jaycees. They decided that they didn't want to go any further.
And there's time frames here. You can't, after you get an appellate court decision, you've got to take some action within so many days. And so we did ask the Jaycees to do it. And there were 9 members present at that meeting, and it was a 5-4 vote to turn the paintings over to us.
This is one of the key moments with what God was doing. I remember you talking, and it looked like it was not going to happen. We weren't going to have the votes. And I was praying, like, God, it's going to stop right here unless you do something, unless you act. And it felt like, in the end, it was by 1 vote. Right. And it just felt like God had acted.
And so the paintings and the custody of those paintings were turned over to the Ottawa Freedom Association so that we could go forward, and Skip and Kirk had a big part in being there and making that decision with the Jaycees.
Now that we had reached the second hurdle by getting the paintings turned over to us by the Ottawa Jaycees, the third hurdle was to get our client, the Ottawa Freedom Association, substituted in the lawsuit for the Ottawa Jaycees. And by God, they did it. You know, the motion was filed, and I remember the letter coming to the office and opening it and ripped it open, and just like you would a paycheck or whatever, or a Christmas present. I mean, and there it was. The motion is allowed.
What had happened earlier in the case is that Richard Rohr had left the area. So he was no longer actually a party. And the appellate court earlier had allowed Jane Doe, whose identity still remains anonymous, and that's why they say Jane Doe. The court allowed her to come in earlier. And, you know, who would have known at the time that that was so important? Because I think that helped the court allow the Ottawa Freedom Association.
The fourth hurdle that we needed to overcome was to get an en banc rehearing before the entire 11-justice panel of the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals.
But that was the next hurdle. It was to ask for the en banc hearing, which means we want all the justices to hear the case.
The National Legal Foundation took on the ACLU, losing at the lower court level, but appealing to the Federal Circuit Court in Chicago. After losing a 2-1 decision at the appellate court, they made an unusual and seldom granted request. They petitioned the court to rehear the case with all 11 federal judges present. And on October 28th, their request was granted.
So then the fifth hurdle was to get the appellate court to overturn that lower 3-judge decision, which banned the paintings. The new decision we were hoping to get and praying to get was to have the court allow the paintings to be erected and shown in Washington Park as they had been for so many years before they were taken down.
It was January of 1992. We had arguments on the en banc. That was quite impressive. Several of us went up to watch Joel Chaffetz argue the case.
And our argument throughout has been that the law and the Supreme Court cases in particular make a critical distinction between when the government itself is putting up a religious display in the center of government, the seat of government, such as City Hall on the one hand, and cases like this where a purely private group of individuals, volunteers, exercise their First Amendment right to free speech by going to a public park, a public forum, and expressing their viewpoint there.
By doing that, they convey a message, the city conveys a message to every resident of Ottawa that Christians and Christianity is the favored religion.
There was one particular justice that kind of had long hair and a long beard, and I thought, oh, this guy really looks, he's probably just as liberal as can be. And he didn't say much until at one point, he finally leaned forward and he said, how can someone like the Ottawa Freedom Association ever overcome an endorsement by a city? Because if a city wanted to quash free speech, all they'd have to do is endorse a religious display. How can they ever overcome that? And the ACLU attorney just fell apart. I mean, she could not answer the question. And he got her to admit that Judge Shader was wrong on that point.
Yeah.
I mean, he just really chewed her up good. And it was very gentle the way he did it. He just led her through a line of questioning.
Remember when he said to the ACLU attorney, as we were arguing the free speech issue, he says to her, shouldn't you really be on the other side?
Oh, I remember, yeah.
Remember that? Shouldn't you really be on the other side, ACLU? That's where the free speech issue is. Their early history was always the exercise clause, free exercise of religion.
I want to bring you what I believe is one of the bright hopes for America. It is the rest of the story of Ottawa, Illinois.
For 7 months, the small town of nearly 20,000 waited to see how the 11-judge panel would rule on the appeal arguments of the National Legal Foundation. On May 16th of this year, the wait was over. In an unprecedented move, the 7th Federal Circuit Court of Appeals unanimously overturned its earlier 2-1 decision, which denied the painting's display in Washington Park.
All 11, for the first time in the history of America, passed on religious expression in the public arena, and all 11 unanimously agreed that it was not an establishment of religion to have these pictures in a public park, which is a public forum and the quintessential place for religious speech, for free speech and assembly.
On May 16th, 1992, which was a Friday, I was sitting in my office when late in the afternoon I received a phone call from a reporter from the Chicago Tribune who asked me if I were the attorney for the Ottawa Freedom Association. I told him I was, and he said, the appellate court decision was handed down a few minutes ago, and you won. Not only that, but he said the decision was unanimous. All 11 justices voted to overturn the previous decisions. And what the appellate court basically said was the JCs are private. And the public park, Washington Park, is a public forum. And the purpose of a public forum, and they use the word quintessential, meaning it is the purest form. That is where expressions of ideas are to take place. After all, this was the park where Lincoln and Douglas had their first debate. Okay? And they said that someone should be able to go in the park and say whatever they want. They made a distinction that if the government is going in there putting up a display, that's different. The Establishment Clause would apply to that, but the JCs and the Ottawa Freedom Association were private. And they had the right of private speech, and therefore, because they were a private organization, they cannot violate the Establishment Clause against religion. So every single justice on that court ruled that the paintings could be back in the park. Now, what's amazing about that is that one of the justices that voted to have the paintings back had originally voted to deny them. In fact, he wrote the majority opinion of the 3-judge panel a year earlier. Justice Coffey, that had written the dissent that encouraged us to continue fighting, wrote the majority opinion for the rehearing en banc court. We realized that the Lord brought us through all 5 hurdles, and that the glory in the victory and having these paintings back in the park is His.
It's just wonderful, and they look so beautiful. They really did. I'm so happy for them, and for us as a city, that we can do this and that, and to show other people that it's worth fighting for.
I think the first thing that went through my mind is the Lord is finally being glorified. This was His time, and in His planning and in His way, it all came together.
It was in this park the first Lincoln-Douglas debate was held 134 years ago. Dr. Kennedy reminded the crowd of nearly 500 Washington Park was again an historical setting.
Well, today there is another debate going on, and this time it finds its center once more here in Ottawa, Illinois. It's also talking about liberty, this time about spiritual liberty, about religious liberty. And you know, it's also talking about slavery. Because whenever religious liberty is diminished, spiritual bondage is increased.
This last painting was left to last because it symbolizes what this community has to do to keep these paintings in this park. It shows Jesus Christ praying. The people of this town have to pray to keep these paintings in this park.
In 1989, when we were ordered to take the paintings down, we decided that the last painting we would remove was the painting of Jesus praying in Gethsemane on the night before his crucifixion. Amy Jonason, who was the president of JC's, stood by that painting, saying that we needed to pray as Jesus is praying if we wanted the paintings back in the park. In 1992, when we were allowed to put the paintings back in the park, we decided that the same painting of Jesus praying in Gethsemane would be the last one that we would put back up.
What do you see in the future?
Well, basically the case itself, since it was a full circuit decision, will carry quite a bit of what we call precedential value. In other words, it will be able to be cited in other instances all across the country as authority for religious freedom in the public forum. I've, ever since the decision came down, have felt that this has swung the pendulum back in the right direction. And what they didn't understand was we were not fighting for the right to just display the paintings, period. We were fighting for the right to be in a public forum.
I think the people have to understand that what they've done is that they've had the backbone. They have stood up in this community, not for Ottawa and not just for Illinois, but for all Americans. Mm-hmm. This case is overwhelming in its decision, and as Skip said, it's a tremendous precedent. There's none like it that I don't know of any where there's been a unanimous decision with the entire panel, and then on religious freedom in addition. This is the first time they've ever passed on the religious expression by a full court, but 11-0. See, that's outstanding. So Ottawa has really made a mark, not only for Ottawa, but for all Americans who want to express their religious expression.
I think as Christians, it's great to see the whole community come together. It was sad, I think, as a community to see him go down in the first place, but I think it pulled us all together, and in hard times, that's what events like this do.
I think the second year that the paintings went up would be 1993. A group came down from Madison, Wisconsin. The group's known as the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And they sought to put up a banner and got permission from the city to put up a banner that said, Jesus Christ is a myth. And so that banner was put up. And unfortunately, there were some people in the community here, in this community, that decided the banner should come down. So they actually took it down. The Freedom from Religion people came back and put it back up again. It was taken down then and put it back again by Freedom from Religion.
And then, of course, there was the morning when the banner was gone and was torn down sometime in the middle of the night. And banner went back up again. I think it got torn down again sometime in the middle of the night. Nobody knew who did it, and if people did know who did it, nobody was going to say anything. And so that little tit-for-tat went on for a good week or two, if I recall.
And those people involved in taking the banner down were prosecuted and paid fines for their actions. And the Ottawa Freedom Association made it known from the very beginning that whether or not we agreed with the sign that went up, the banner in the park, it should be allowed because of the right to freedom of speech for any belief, whether it's a non-belief or whether it's a Christian belief or whether it's a Buddhist or a Muslim or Confucius, whatever belief is, you have a right as a citizen to go into a public forum and express your belief, whether it be by paintings or a banner or just speaking there on the corner with a bullhorn. You can do that. So we have stood up for that as the Ottawa Freedom Association over these years. In fact, one year when the banner went up, men from the Ottawa Freedom Association sat there all night to make sure that the banner was not torn down. But we have to protect that belief for all people, for Buddhists, Muslims, unbelievers, anyone who wants to express their opinion in a public forum should be allowed to do so. So we as the Ottawa Freedom Association stand for that principle and continue to put the paintings up in the park each year and continue to seek to protect that right to free expression. Now, a lot of pressure was brought on the Ottawa Freedom Association by many leaders in the community to simply stop fighting for this and just put the painting somewhere else or put something else up instead of the paintings of the life of Christ. And there were suggestions that if the Ottawa Freedom Association took the paintings down, well, then the Freedom From Religion would take their banner down, and even approached the Ottawa Freedom Association that we should do that. We should take it down, and that would resolve the conflict. But the point is that the freedom of expression is more important than all of those, because once that is given up, then no one can go into the park and express their beliefs if enough pressure is brought to bear to keep them out. This way, it's protected by a court decision and by the government of the United States of America that we have that right established in the Constitution to express our beliefs, whatever they may be.
Thank you for watching our documentary on the paintings of Jesus that we display in Washington Park. We give thanks to our Lord Jesus for his providence in preserving the right of free religious expression, which is guaranteed to us by the First Amendment to the United States Constitution. This right, however, needs to be used to be effective. The next generations, therefore, need to be on guard to make sure that the paintings of Jesus are displayed in Ottawa's public forum, Washington Park. Our prayer is that those who come behind us will be diligent in this regard.
I'm honored to be a part of the board of Ottawa Freedom Association now and to continue the legacy they've started. I've been personally involved with putting up the paintings for a little over 20 years, I think. And within that time, my son also got involved. He might have been, I'm guessing, roughly 13 years old. He's now 28 years old. And it's important for us to use young people to get involved so that when our generation is gone, there will be somebody else to continue on.
I was about 13, maybe 12 years old at the time, and I didn't know much about it. I was brought by my dad, and we were doing this thing, putting up the paintings in the park. Through the years, I've grown to know more and more about it. Every year, I heard the leaders and the people that are in charge of putting this together talk about the struggles that they went through in past years, the legal battles, the spiritual battles. And I come to know of what this is really all about. It's all about religious freedom. It's about the freedom that we are so blessed to have in the country of America. And it's about the fundamentals of what we believe in a public place where all are free to share their beliefs.
We need to enlighten people as to why we fought and why it was important. Because people still think that it was over Christmas decoration.
Grandpa, will these paintings always be here?
And I trust that we will see a rebirth of liberty, religious and spiritual liberty, and spiritual life in this country, and I trust that it will grow out from this center once again of Ottawa, Illinois, and that the shackles of spiritual slavery will begin to be removed from this nation.
The only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing.
Be